The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to Creating Engagement in the Classroom. Um, our first of 9 webinars that we have as part of this series for our book, Creating Engagement in the Classroom. My name is Kevin Popovich, and I'm with my co-author, Ryan Vancher. How you doing, Ryan?
Awesome, great to be here.
Great to be here indeed. For those of you following along at home, please follow our conversation on social media at #CreatingEngagement. And of course, you can always find everything around creating engagement in the classroom at creatingengagementintheclassroom.org. So as we get started here, I want to tell you just a little bit about our authors, Ryan and myself. I'm the founder of Idea House. I'm a lecturer at San Diego State University and on the board of advisors at the Lavin Entrepreneurship Program. Ryan?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Vancher. I'm actually still an undergraduate here at San Diego State. I'm also the co-founder of a higher education software company, and I've been getting very involved in the educational research part of what we do.
Yeah. So as we get started, a lot of this was had come from our individual backgrounds, right? I remember what it was like to be a student a lot of years ago, and I remember some of the early technology in the classroom for me was a big giant television, and there was the film projectors from back in the day, mimeographs. And I remember when it was a big deal when they came wheeling a television in and we had cable. That was a big deal. So I remembered everything that I had experienced when I was a student. And as I've got into being an educator, I try to remember all of that as I try to make my classes better. And I taught undergrad for a number of years, and every time that there was an opportunity to introduce technology that was appropriate, I've tried to do so because I think it can make a dramatic improvement in the education and the experience and the engagement in the classroom. My doctoral studies have been in instructional technology, so I really have taken what I've experienced and where my passion was, and I've tried to focus it more on a larger scale. And I know that there's more that we can do with technology in the classroom, and that's been one of my focuses. And it's been the kind of the impetus for conversations Ryan and I have shared as well. So Ryan, give everybody a bit more about your background and how you got here.
Sure. So my background was kind of interesting. I came right out of high school into the military, so I spent a while serving in the Army and then also working in the private sector before I returned to my studies, so to speak. But in high school, I was never really like an all-star performer. I really struggled with most of my classes, partly because I didn't really have any focus on education. But once I came back to school, I took the community college route. It was affordable. It offered low, ratio classes where I can get to know the professors, get some specialized attention, did a lot of tutoring. And once I finally decided I want to go to university and got my associate's degree, I thought San Diego State was going to be the place that offered the best program in terms of the international business avenue that I wanted to pursue. So when I got down here, unfortunately, I got diagnosed with cancer my very first semester transferring in, as a community college student into university, which in and of itself is a pretty big transition, but, to add chemotherapy, cancer on top of your education workload could be pretty tough. So my kind of transfer, into the educational realm and in technology really came out of necessity for needing to be able to compete with far less resources than the typical student had, because I was missing 10 days a month, in the hospital trying to figure out how to keep my grades up, how to make up my tests. And out of necessity, I was able to kind of understand how somebody like me who would sit at the front of the class traditionally, losing my hair and my confidence, I kind of migrated to the back. And when I did that, I met a lot of different students, whereas before I couldn't understand why you wouldn't participate, why you wouldn't raise your hand, why you wouldn't get to know the professor, because I was told that's the only way, to make sure you're getting your education and getting the attention you need. But when I went to the back, I saw kids, taking pictures of their whiteboards, and they never took notes because, they had other methods to do it. They would record audios, they would take videos. And I started seeing a lot of different tools and sort of, I guess, hacking, if you want to, for lack of a better term, that these students were implementing to learn more effectively, more efficiently. But the tools and the avenues they were using were technology, which was something I always, steered away from. So, kind of through that experience, I realized that technology does have a role to play in the learning experience, and it's really being able to have that conversation with professors to encourage them to actually teach these students how to use that technology in their advantage as opposed to typically be distracted from it. And talking with KP, I think we kind of realized that this was a conversation that has, kind of gone on unspoken for a while, and so I'm just kind of glad to be, a student that's able to take part of that, at least spark that conversation.
Right. Yeah, because when you and I had met up, it was during a lean model competition, and you were presenting with Luke on what you were doing with Course Key, and that's something that I really reacted to quite well. As an educator and somebody whose interests were in instructional technologies, I could see that you guys are really trying to address some issues that I had been trying to address in just different ways, right? So I think that's, those early conversations that we had and that early exposure to your student perspective, which was your impetus for starting Course Key, I think was the thing that was really interesting to me, because most of the conversations that I had were really with my colleagues on my side of the podium, if you will, was with other professors and educators, and very rarely do we get into conversations with students about how to make things better in the classroom. So I think that was, for me, something that's kind of, I don't say re-energized, but it really just made me take a look very differently at what was going on in my classroom from your perspectives. And I'm wondering, what are you seeing now? I mean, how has what you've been looking at from a student kind of taken off?
Well, I think it's also interesting because you mentioned Luke, and his story is a little bit different from mine. But what we found was, ourselves, like a lot of other students, were ending up at the same place, regardless, of the path that we took to get there. And it was in these large auditorium classes where, we struggled to even, get to know the content, let alone our professors and fellow students. And so when I heard his story, a small town kid from, coming from a high school where, his teachers knew his sports he played, they knew the music he liked, they knew, his family. And then you go from that sort of learning environment into, an auditorium essentially. And I realized that, my problem that I was having as a result of my health issues were the same problems that he was having as a result of, him preferring another learning environment. And so when we talked to more kids and we talked to more professors and we started seeing the overlap, in between, the professors told me about their headaches, the students told us about, their challenges, and we found that they kind of stem from the same, 3 areas: lack of personalization. There's no connection aside from that 1 hour of content, which is basically a lecture, very few resources for both the professors and students, or at least that they know about. And so what we found was it's just very difficult to navigate higher education in general for both sides of that podium.
All right. So now that, that you've got this newer learning, right? How are you seeing this? What other conversations are coming from this? I mean, what are you seeing happening in the classroom now?
Well, so when we really start to get into it, that there's like a traditional podium barrier where education's kind of been the same way the last 100 years, where we as students go in and sit in our seat. There's always a presenter at the front. There's a time frame set up for it and an expected amount of material that needs to be covered. And so what we're really trying to do now, and what we're seeing, is that traditional podium barrier is breaking down as professors and educators are transitioning to, tech-based classrooms where they're able to use data a little bit more and start getting to know the students and the method that they prefer, which is something we all speak is digital. The other things that we're looking at are, the breakdown of academic silos, where most professors think their problems are unique. But as we go and interview, department by department and discipline by discipline, we're finding tons of commonality in terms of the struggle that the educators are facing. So I think, one, we're kind of breaking down silos, and two, we're kind of removing the podium, which is allowing us to have the conversation more effectively.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same. I see students when I'm employing technology into my classroom, not only for presentations but for engaging the material. I'm seeing greater interest. And particularly in my longer form classes. I teach 2.5 hour lectures, and and that's a long time to be focused on something. I've seen the technology making a big improvement in the way that I'm able to collect responses in attendance, right? In a number of different ways. So, which kind of leads me into those key challenges, right, that you and I have been discussing. There's these very extensive conversations about our dual perspectives on a situation has been very informative. And as we've tried to make more sense of it all, instead of it just being one kind of long conversation, I think the way that we've organized them has helped facilitate those conversations and keep people on point. Are you seeing the same types of things when you're having your separate conversations on these topics?
Yeah, I think what we find mostly working with, especially our professors, is that the problems are widespread, but there may be just a few that you really relate to, and it's usually dependent upon like the class size you teach or the subject matter, right? If you're teaching 50 or 500 students, you may have scaling issues in terms of grading and things. So for us to be able to kind of break down the components of the overall problem into these subcategories allows professors to kind of connect the dots for them and figure out where is it that they could improve, or where is it that they see room for growth.
Right. So let's go through some of these as part of our overview of our web series that's to come. Let's talk about some of these things that we're seeing. For instance, let's talk about the attendance. Right. So attendance in student success has been a big issue. From my side of the podium, what I see is that I need to enforce attendance. Right. Because if you don't, then I feel like the students choose when they want to participate. You have to show up for something good to happen, right? And if I can't get them into my classroom, then I can't help them learn, which is kind of what our relationship is all about. So for me, getting them to attend class on a regular basis is equal to their student success. If they show up, I believe I can help them learn. And I know that there's been some varying opinions on enforcing attendance. But Ryan, so what's your opinion on it, and what are you hearing from other students?
Well, I think from a student perspective, it's interesting because there's sort of mixed signals that you get. Some professors will tell you that attendance is of the utmost importance because it prepares you for, the real world when you graduate and go into whatever, industry you're going to get into. Nobody's going to ask you, do you show up for work today? They're just going to know. At the other end of it, though, there's some legislation and other types of things that really prevent professors from grading, in some campuses and universities on attendance, which, they then have to tie it to participation and, kind of treat it as a workaround. And so there might be a misconception on students' part that, they say the attendance doesn't matter when, in reality it is. We're just having to call it something else. But I think if there was, I think it's a well-known, fact that if you don't go to the gym, you're never going to get the results you're looking for. And from a student perspective, I think that's, highly relatable to going to class. How are you going to learn if you're not in that seat? Unless, you're one of the guys that can teach yourself a textbook, which is, far less students than you would expect.
Right. And then to that end, it's how you go about taking attendance, if that is an issue that you're addressing. And I found by the inclusion of technology, I'm able to gain back some of that manual time. For instance, the way that I've done it in the past was to open up the roster, the spreadsheet that gets sent to me from admin, and it says, here are all the students, right? And you go down, and it's, first names, looking for people, and then you're looking up, and then you're looking for somebody to raise their hand, right? You're scanning where you last remember that they sat, if you can remember that, in a larger classroom, and you're looking around, right? It's kind of like the Mueller, the movie, right? Bueller, anyone? Bueller, right? Bueller, and you're looking and you get a nothing, right? And you go back, and depending on the scale of that class, right, that could be 15 minutes to a half an hour of your life you don't get back. And in a short class with a lot of students, that really eats up quite a bit of time. Again, there's better ways to do that, right? And that's one of the things that I'm seeing helps contribute to creating more engagement. I have students now that are just checking in off their phone, right? I know if they were there or not, and I don't have to take time out of my schedule, and I don't have to worry about where you were or weren't you there, right? I'll look at the records and whether you punched in or not, and that's a big time saver for me, and as I'm looking
Yeah,
to fit the most time in, even for my class, Ryan, 15 minutes still makes a difference.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when students are sitting there, it takes us 15 minutes to get distracted. So if we're going to start the class, we sit down and we're waiting for everybody else's name to get called. You've lost us by the time you're done with that attendance. If you can save the 10 to 15 minutes and spend that teaching and, prepping and motivating the class for the 2 hours of content that's about to follow, I think that'd be a far bigger advantage than actually, making the students pay, a percentage of their tuition dollars to hear their other students' names called.
Right, which really leads to our next topic of connecting with students, right? Being able to go right directly into a program, without all those distractions. It's very helpful for me because I'm able to, to stay excited about the content. They're able to stay excited about the content. I start off my class on a positive note, and we're able to get right into to material. So, connecting with those students is more than just on that one-on-one, right? I have to connect to my audience as an educator, slash presenter slash entertainer at times, right? Again, at a 2.5 hour lecture, that's a lot of time, and obviously you work a lot of material into that, but how are you going to get them engaged, right? They know that they're getting ready for a 2.5 hour session as well, right? So if I bring a positive energy to it, I think that's one of the ways that I'm able to connect with students, and not getting into some drone-like reading of the roster is a nice way for me to get started in the class. You know, what are you?
Yeah.
What do you see from your seats when a class starts off like this?
I think in the past, especially the classes that I've taken, and I have a couple more left before I graduate, but it's a pretty, big consensus when you find a professor, even if it's class at 8 a.m. in the morning, but he's making an effort to engage and connect. You don't mind getting up and going to the 8 a.m. class as much as you mind going, to the 1 p.m. class where, it's going to be an hour and 15 minutes of, I guess the Bueller dry red eyes guy is a good example of that, right?
Right.
So I think for students, whenever they come across, kind of a gem, so to speak, those professors typically get identified because they have the swelling enrollment weights, and all the students are trying to crash their course. And it's because they actually make that effort, like you said, to, get to know their students and make sure that they understand where they're coming from so that they can effectively teach better.
Yeah, and I think it's in part of that teaching, it gets into definitely in the presentation of the material, right? If I can present that material in a bit more interesting way, right? Some of those interesting ways that I do it is trying to look at the inclusion of video and websites and different types of content via charts and graphs and quotes and whatnot, right? By instead of it just being the traditional slide, PowerPoint slides, and kind of knocking through those slides, it's been helpful to be able to involve some different types of content via different types of technology to better connect with the students, right? And I think a lot of students prefer, some sort of multiple media in class, right? I mean, what are you hearing?
I think it just kind of boils down to students' preferences on learning. I mean, most students, to be honest, can't thrive in a strictly, read, write, and type of environment where it's just a lecture. I know a lot of my friends have to have a little bit more hands-on approach. I know friends that study by making songs about content. So I think it just really depends on the way the students like to absorb the material. But when you have so many different students absorbing in their preferred method, the traditional lecture leaves only a handful in an arena where they can succeed. So what I think is, especially working with our professors, is there is a common language to connecting with students and really being able to deliver the content and the method that they like, but that kind of supplementer tends to be technology. You can give it in many different forms. You can learn languages, music. There's a million other, intelligences you can develop with the help of technology as opposed to against it.
Right. And in that technology too, it's been able to help me come up for better ways for my students to provide answers to questions. Right. I mean, a lot of the a lot of the general polling of a class, right? You say, so raise your hand if this, and raise your hand if that. And I'm always amazed that you'll get some people that raise their hands for A and some people that raise their hands for B. I just experienced it in class last night. And then, but A plus B does not equal to my total class size, right? There are C, people who did not do anything, right? And I think a lot of those people are just kind of like, they're kind of tuned out, right? So one of the ways that I've been able to get them to tune in, is to break the class up into smaller bits. And, when there is an opportunity to provide answers to questions, one of the ways has been by like a class survey, right? So being able to go on a mobile phone and having them hit a button, right, to kind of play a little game as we're breaking up the 2.5 hour lecture has been very effective, right? It forces them to focus on something new. It gets them into some technology, which of course they're very comfortable with. And but then on my screen, I have some corresponding multimedia, with the bar goes up, the bar goes down, you're able to see different types of answers. And again, now it's a different stimulus to facilitate getting answers to questions, which leads to more discussion about what we're talking about in the first place. And from what we're seeing, Ryan, it seems like students are reacting very well to that type of polling and interactivity, right?
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to kind of the new class dynamics, whereas before, when you knew everybody in your class, you were okay with speaking up. Now it's getting to the point where you know absolutely nobody. When you're sitting in a lecture with, whether it's 50 or 500 and somebody doesn't get it, it's very hard to raise your hand and say, I'm that guy. Everybody look over here. So when we were surveying students trying to figure out, what were their challenges, we found that half the students told us that they would participate in class more if they could be anonymous. Now, whether that's, a testament to our generation, social skills or not, I'm not sure, but I do know that professors are telling us, when they give the options of, online forums or discussion boards, he gets voices and student opinion and expression that he never sees in his classroom from students that he's never heard from. So there is something to say about, the role of technology in giving students a voice when, a traditional class setup doesn't allow for that. So if you're interested in hearing, from both sides of the spectrum, your type A's and your more introverts, I think putting some sort of channel in place for that to happen is a step in the right direction. Because I don't think any student's question should go unanswered, and most educators we work with will tell us that there's no such thing, as a bad question.
Right. Yeah, I've seen the same type of success in the formative assessments that I'm able to provide. One of the things that I try to do is provide some benchmarking for students to let them know, how they're doing compared to other students within reason, and being able to show real-time results for for formative assessments is very helpful. And I'm wondering, from my perspective and my side of the podium, right? I think it's very helpful in being able to provide this. Ryan, from your student perspective, how do real-time results make a difference for you?
So when I'm in the experience I've had with these types of polling is it really, again, going back to our attention spans, it keeps us in the game, right? If we get a poll every 15 minutes, it kind of requires us to refocus and consider the question, and then we know, okay, now we're back to the material. So it's kind of a nice fish hook, so to speak, to keep the students participating. The second part that I really like about it is whether it's graded or not graded, the data really helps you to be able to get to understand your class on a macro level. Some examples of this are, we have professors in political science classes where, before you get into these touchy subjects, you got to kind of understand who your audience is. So being able to poll and say, on what side of the political spectrum do you find yourself falling, or, these types of questions where it's really more qualitative and less about the grade, more about the consensus. You can get to know the class a lot better, and the class can get to know itself through creative application of these types of tools.
Right. And a lot of those tools that we're seeing are very much appropriate for our mobile enabled students, right, in social learning, right? So a lot of those assessments become things of conversation, right? And one of the things that we're seeing is that social learning is being a bigger part of my classroom, right? And I see students talking about things outside of the classroom. What's your opinion of the students on that? Because like trying to use social outside of the classroom has been a challenge in the past, I'm finding by setting up some channels for social learning that I actually get some students that will contribute to that because they're doing it anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first point is one, the students we're working with, we're talking higher education, right? And so, the statistics show right now that the 4-year university student in the U.S. typically has, 2.5 smart devices. So that means that not only are they sitting in class with a cell phone or the laptop, they've probably got, a tablet or some other device with them as well. So the infrastructure, as long as the campus has Wi-Fi and the students are continuously bringing these anyways, is there to support this type of technology. But also, going back to the back end part of that, the class facilitation is the side of education that most professors don't even know exists, which is, those tools that students are putting in place to support themselves when the lecturer isn't giving them the resources they need to do that. A perfect example of this is Facebook, right? It's one of the most disruptive, applications that you can put on a phone in terms of having it during class time, except after class, students are using the chat and creating these study groups inside that where there is an educational purpose that's being served, but there's just nothing in place with the classroom that allows us to do that. So, the professors aren't getting invited to these groups, obviously. We don't want to share our, weekend pictures with you and talk about them on Monday when class starts. So we try to, avoid that personal relationship. But, if some tool or if there's something in place that allows that same kind of educational activity to happen, I think it's worth exploring to see if you can kind of bring that back in-house, under your own umbrella as a professor and sort of moderate that environment, because these conversations that are being had can either be pushed, way further than students can take them with the help of that lecturer or educator, or if it gets too far down the wrong area or something, in particular is forgot, in that timeline, the professor can jump in and always, interject or dial it back and make sure that the students stay on the right conversation.
Right. So that's one of the things that's kind of interesting, right? Because a lot of that, social has been such kind of like the dirty word about, in a classroom, right? A lot of professors have been so hesitant about allowing mobile devices into the classroom, and because they tend to think that all they're doing is something besides what they're supposed to be doing in class, right? Paying attention, taking notes, doing those types of things. And one of the things I've had to realize that even on a phone, on a device that I think has one application, right? I have a student that actually takes notes on his phone. It just that's the device he uses, and I've had to come to some sort of, I guess, a bit of a just a trust with my students that when they are on those devices, that they're doing things that they're supposed to be doing. Now, do I think that they're going off the reservation every once in a while? Yeah, but I think that is it's something that I'm okay with them doing something every once in a while, if I can keep them engaged, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
device allows me to do a lot more things in my class than if they didn't have the device, right? I mean, what do you think? You think other educators have that you've spoken to? Do they share this perspective, Brian?
Yeah, and I think it's founded, to be honest with you. We've looked at a lot of data from 2014 where they polled students and asked them, what are you guys using your cell phones for? And while 86% of students back then in higher education had a smartphone, only 50% of those students said, what, I'm actually using it for learning and in class, assignments. So that means you still have 36% of that poll that's sitting in your classroom distracted by their cell phone. And I think one of the things we try to, is going back and saying, when we talk to professors and we ask them today, how do you teach and where did you learn that? They tell us that they teach the same way that their professors that they like taught them. And so our kind of like that if somebody's going to teach the student how to learn or how to teach, you kind of have to understand the mechanisms that they're supposed to do that. Otherwise, they're being told technology is bad, technology is not a learning tool, technology, has no place in the educational process, when in reality, as soon as they graduate, they're going to walk into jobs that expect them to be tech savvy and equipped to do business. So I think there needs to be some conversation, which is what I'm hoping we're doing, down the road, that kind of addresses that and says that somebody's got to teach them the best practices, for using this technology. Somebody's got to tell them what are valuable resources and what aren't. And if students are coming here to learn, I think that should be a part of the teaching process, is teaching students how to responsibly absorb information, because there's an unlimited amount out there. And we know, majority of that is not useful in academia.
Well, I think that kind of gets us into this next section, right? Digital literacy and classroom integrity, right? So I think the digital literacy, I could argue is more of a burden for my colleagues as professors, because I think a lot of us bring our personal opinions and our perspectives from our generation to those devices, right? You're saying, hey, you're on a computer, you're on your phone, so you must be texting somebody, right? And I think that's perhaps some degree of just a underappreciation or a lack of understanding on what what students do on those devices besides texting. And wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've had kind of confrontations that, I came back after, being in the private sector, and I got pretty familiar with technology before I came back to school. But when I really started using it was when I got sick. And I remember having conversations where, I'd take a picture of the whiteboard so I didn't have to take notes, and I can pay attention, and then I'd have to let the professor know, like, hey, I'm taking this picture, he'd tell me, why aren't you taking notes? And I tell him, well, I'd rather spend my time understanding what you're talking about and trying to make sure I wrote every single word that was on your whiteboard, right? And he wrote it better. He wrote it more organized. He had the color coding down for me. So all I had to do was go back and just hand trace this to try to burn it into my memory. And so I had to explain to him that, while it does look like I'm pulling out my cell phone and taking a picture of you, I'm actually taking a picture of your notes. And then once he understood that, there's actually like kind of a wave that happened through the class where all the students, started paying attention and just taking pictures of the notes on the board. And he went above and beyond to make it more organized and more, readable and understandable for us, which really kind of helped the overall class. But again, it took an office visit, a conversation to kind of, get his perspective to shift from this guy's disrupting the class to this guy's enhancing his education.
Right. So then, I think that this is paired up well with classroom integrity, because now you've got, you have a behavior shift. You have, let's say you get, a professor does get to the point where they feel comfortable in allowing devices into the room and a better understanding of what students are doing on those devices. The classroom integrity has to be addressed, because we can't just say that once this gets presented to the class that, hey, everything is going to be fine, because people are going to take advantage of this. And let's just talk about the elephant in the room. What about cheating, right? How is this getting addressed? Because it's one of the things that I find to be um, I won't say it's a challenge, because that would mean that I think that it is that it's something that we can't address, but it is something that happens, right? And the devices, right, connectivity to extraneous sources, to anything that would provide answers or insight into in some sort of assessment, it really falls under that guise of cheating, right? So it's tough for me sometimes. I struggle with having students have devices on. Admittedly, I still do a scan of the room to see if there's somebody that's, doing that looks like they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. But it is a challenge. It is an ongoing challenge from professors I speak with, because those, of us who are very pro technology and, can't overlook the fact that some kids are going to use this to cheat.
Yeah, 100%. And so the issue with that is that, and as students, I can tell you firsthand, I've spoke with many students who will tell me, honestly, like I'd spend more time trying to beat the system than to just work the system itself and get the good grade. And the reason being, I think it boils down to kind of, you have two types of measures that are put in place, right? You've got kind of punitive measures that are seen a little bit more as, rules that are meant to be broken by students. And then you have collaborative measures, right? Where professors are, kind of using that good faith and making sure students are, kind of an honor code approach to the way that they run the class. And I think it's not really the either or. I think it's the middle ground where you establish your best practices, and you've got to have, some consequence if they hit the threshold of academic dishonesty with technology. But at the same time, if you kind of make it a more collaborative environment and come with a census for students to a consensus on, what are we agreeing that we're going to use this for, and you establish that early on, I think having those conversations, and again, going back to, educating your students on the benefits and obviously the detriments of using technology in positive or negative ways during your educational experience.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think education is that key for the students, but also for the educators, right? I mean, there's a lot of education for all of us to reach what we're calling digital literacy, right? And that digital literacy, from a competency standpoint, seems to be in favor of the students at this point. Right? Students have grown up with technology. Most adult professors and educators have learned technology much after their teenagers for the most part. I was pretty early in on every type of technology that came down the pike. So probably not what we would consider the typical educator, but as we look at how students learn and what educators can do, I think that there is an evolving and a new benchmark, if you will, of educator evaluation. And as you and I have discussed many times, right, I think there has to be a certain level of competency with technology. We're not just talking about the AV orientation that you know how to turn on the projector and you know how to call the help desk and get to the internet and change between your laptop and your desktop in a dock cam. I mean, I think that what we're talking about is more of I get technology, I get how I'm going to use technology in my classroom, and I know how students communicate, and I'm going to work towards developing channels of communication that are digital that will supplement my my, I guess we call them analog in class, right? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity outside the classroom, outside of doing better in the classroom to create engagement. I think there's a lot more that we can do with technology outside the classroom. But I see the barrier being more of the professors than the students. What do you see?
Yeah, and I think there's actually some recent stuff going on that kind of validates that. Where in Florida, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they did a K through 12. They took a local district there in K through 12, and they added digital literacy to their educator evaluation. And while the district did really well without that in the mix, as soon as they introduced their kind of tech savviness as another indicator of how successful an educator they were, a lot of the schools came as a result of that extra variable. So I think you kind of are right in that we have, a fairly significant head start. But in terms of how we would apply that to our education, I think that's something that we're still learning as students. So if that's, a road that we can kind of travel down together where it's more collaborative in terms of how this is going to be implemented, because to be honest, most classes aren't, 100% tech friendly. There's still a good chunk of courses that won't even let you take out your cell phone on principle. So I think, moving into digital literacy as sort of a standard makes sense at the local level, but also if you look, macro and global, the countries that have, the best education programs, or at least rank the highest in education, all have some sort of technical academia built into their disciplines. So you can be taking, art classes, but they still make you take, a series of technical classes as well. And you look at South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, that's the top 1 through 4 right now. They're heavily, they heavily integrate technology into their curriculum, whether you're teaching, business or, art or intercultural communication. It doesn't really matter. There's some technical aspect that these students are taking. And I think as a culture, it's showing now, on the world scene where, their education results in terms of testing, as we know it, are scoring far beyond that of our own, where we have, less technical aspects into our education unless it's by design.
Right. I agree. Hey, so we really want to get to come at some of these big takeaways, right? And I think we've kind of danced over a lot of those key takeaways, and which is kind of indicative of what we're going to see in the other 8 webinars that are part of this series, right? So I want to make sure that we get a chance to address some of the questions as well. So as part of our Q&A here, let's see. We've got our first question. Ryan, this has been posed to you. Because what has the reaction to the book been from professors? Right. You go first, and then I'll tell you what I hear from my colleagues.
So the professors that we've introduced this content to, one, they're kind of surprised that students are kind of sparking and taking part in this initiative. They're just, they're kind of just overwhelmed that somebody would care enough to bring that to them in the first place. So that's kind of interesting and neat to see them, see value in the effort before they even get to the content. But once they get past that and open the book, we usually get a lot of feedback after the fact where they're either saying, I never thought about it that way, or, this is something, I've heard for a long time, but I didn't know it was so widespread. And so one of the things that we're doing is kind of shedding light and letting them know that the struggle that they're facing isn't unique to their classroom, that there's other professors trying to solve the same problems. And then once they realize that students, are kind of shouldering some of that same load, it's interesting to see, how much more open they are to conversations about, potential pedagogy shifts and different ways to engage in their lectures. But I think it really, the big spark comes from just the information that's available, and when you kind of collaborate with the other educators that are featured in the work, and you can read the quotes from the students that we're talking to, it really gives them a sense that this is real, this is happening right next door and in their classrooms they're keeping next to, and it allows them to kind of open up and tell us what they're experiencing as well. So it is really building a community, which is a cool thing to see.
Yeah, our next question here: have students engaged in this conversation? Right. So I'll start this one. What I've seen is quite a lot of students have engaged in this conversation. Right. I'm surprised to see how many students be so vocal about preferences that they have in the classroom, because a lot of the statements that I'm seeing students in our conversation at hashtag creating engagement and on blog posts are actually saying what they like, what they don't like about a class, and it's not. And I got to say, for most of the time, it's been constructive. And so I'm very surprised, because I'll tell you, 20 years ago, I don't think that you would get students who would have contributed so much substance. And it seems as if students are a bit more engaged in making sure that they have a good education. What are you seeing?
Yeah, and I think one of the nice things about it is students are some of the most honest people that you're ever going to interview or survey. I mean, they really have no shame in terms of what their experience is like. And so it's pretty cool to see, like you said, the constructive part of it where, they do have the opportunity to just bash and bash and bash. And it seems like now that, they understand the cost associated with the education, they understand, the limited resources that professors have, they're looking at it more of as, it's the environment itself that's the problem, and it's kind of making the narrative less about is this the student versus the teacher, and more about, well, what's the environment that we're both being placed in. So students are becoming a lot more understanding of their educational experience as a result, and I think it's really helping to bridge that gap that we talked about, trying to connect the professor at the podium to the students in those stadium seats.
Right. Our last question is, have we considered doing events around this learning, which you and I actually have talked about doing events. So one of the things Ryan and I had suggested that we do from different schools that are looking to make a concerted effort towards creating engagement is creating a learning event on campus around the creating engagement book and the content therein. So yes, you can look at for the events, look at creating engagement in the classroom.org on our event schedule. All of our events will be added there. And if there is an opportunity to speak at a school near you, please let us know. You can reach both Ryan and I through the website, and we can take a look if we can bring our events to their school. Right, Ryan?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, that's what we've got for our first of 9 webinars. Ryan, what do you think? How did we do today?
I think we set the tone pretty good for what's going to come, and I encourage everybody to visit us on the next one. We're really kind of getting to the meat of what we do and provide some of those best practices, creative strategies, and anything else that we can offer to help you guys connect with the students and the students to, have some better learning outcomes.
Yeah, I agree too. I think this is, as you and I discussed earlier, this is really kind of a conversation that frames our bigger conversation. This is the overview of all of the information that we've discovered in putting this book together. And, each of the different sections that we'll get into now really will have a lot more in-depth look at issues, comments, and solutions, and a variety of solutions. So we encourage everybody to please look for our other webinars, register, and join our conversation at hashtag creating engagement. And Ryan, we'll talk to you on the next webinar.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Creating Engagement in the Classroom, Understanding the Challenges of the Modern Day Learning Environment is written by Kevin Popovich and Ryan Fancher.
To learn more about creating engagement in your classroom, visit creatingengagementintheclassroom.org or follow #creatingengagement.